Okay, thank you. We'll pull the meeting to order here on Tuesday, February 4. And our first matter is a continued public hearing for 767 King Street LLC, Chislehurst Subdivision Lot Number 6. This is an application for a site plan amendment, wetlands permit, steep slopes permit amendment, tree removal permit, and stormwater pollution prevention plan. 767 King Street, New York Route 120.
Good evening, everyone. For the record, my name is Stephen Rabel. I'm with the law firm of McCullough, Goldberger, and Stout. And I'm here tonight on behalf of Gary and Samara Klein, the owners of 767 King Street. We last appeared before you in November, and since then we have made quite a few changes to the plan, largely in response to your comments and questions. Specifically, we've reduced impacts to site disturbance, rock removal and excavation, and overall development coverage. So what we'd like to do tonight is have Lori Beppu from Blaze McCoy Architecture walk you through the changes to the building itself. Dan Thorpe from LaGuardia Design Group take you through some of the changes to the overall site plan. Doug Roy from GZA Geo-Environmental of New York do a quick comparison on some of the geotechnical impacts, and then Alan Pilch from ALP Engineering and Landscape Architecture will walk you through the stormwater design. We also have with us tonight Heath Horn from Pruitt and Company Custom Builders, if you have any questions for his field. So with that, I'll turn it right over to Lori.
Perfect, great, thank you.
Do you need a clicker?
Yeah, that would be great
You
if
guys
you had
have
one.
Here, you have to take out, you have to download your file because there's only one report. What's in the back?
How are you?
For the record, I'm Lori Beppu. I'm here representing Blaze McCoy Architecture and our clients, Samara and Gary Klein. Thank you for allowing us the opportunity to present to you again. I'd like to just walk you through some of the plan changes that we've implemented. Then we'll take a look at the renderings, followed by just kind of a historical look at where we've gone with this project since we first presented to the board, and then finally a comparison with the 2002 approval. So here you can see the new lower level plan, and as the next diagram will demonstrate, we have a, this doesn't have a,
It doesn't show.
okay.
Because the red doesn't show on the screen, but
Sure.
you can use this.
You want to use one of ours? Here, the special, they work.
Thanks. Let's see. Here we go. Yep. Let me get back to where I was. Okay.
Well, that was great. We're done.
So this area in here was a big focus of our redesign. You can see that the building footprint used to extend in this zone where we had a four-car garage, and we had an exterior lower level parking court here, which we've omitted. We also reduced the overall footprint of the lower level with the intention of reducing the site impact and soil and rock removals. The big change, and Dan Thorpe will speak to this a little bit further, but the big change which that allowed was the driveway grading now does not need to drop down in order to get to the parking court, which significantly reduced the length and height of that retaining wall that we had spoken about last. This comparison kind of walks you through the overall changes. This light gray area is the previous parking court, the previous footprint. This is the new building footprint. And you can see all of these areas outside of that new footprint are no longer part of the required excavation.
So the garage will be up here now?
That's correct. These are two section views that help to illustrate how this was successful in reducing the soil removals. This section is running north-south through the site, so our previous driveway was grading up to the main level of the house. This was all lower level garage. And now we do not have lower level space below a portion of the north wing. And we were able to regrade so that it was a much gentler slope up to the first floor. You can also see this exterior terrace view with the spa was pulled to the north and reduced in size so that we didn't need to remove as much. Here's another view, sections that are running east-west through the site. And this is that exterior parking court, which no longer exists, so that we're able to achieve this condition here.
So for the most part, that'll just remain untouched, I mean, to the extent that you can, of course, with your construction.
Correct, yeah, I mean, there'll be an overcut
Right,
for foundations and so forth, but to the extent that we can. This is the first floor plan. You can see how, whereas previously that exterior terrace extended towards the clearing and grading limit line, we're pulled way back from it, and the spa is now engaged in the terrace rather than kind of cantilevered out over the edge.
You had a cut last time in here, I thought, there was some sort of cut out there, was that where the, and now you have this area that I think is proposed to be part, maybe the spot was there, I don't recall.
So,
The-
can I jump in?
Sure, absolutely, come on up.
Come on up, you
Yep.
have to
Have to identify
introduce
yourself.
yourself. Because it makes it easier for the stenographer.
Daniel Thorpe, landscape architect with LaGuardia Design Group. That area in question was a concrete stormwater planter. We've since changed it to deck floating over existing grade, so that we can continue to honor that swale channel down the side of the
Okay.
building. And I'll get to it in my presentation, but the stormwater planters we saw as obstacles in the way of that swale and have since been moved between the two volumes of the building, which Lori allowed us to do by opening that up.
Okay, great, thank you.
So I think we're really happy with the way that these changes have affected the design. We feel it's actually strengthened the design overall. There's perhaps more clarity in the two volumes, and then these connector bars between them. This is a view of the first floor, and you can see how those terrace reductions played out before and after.
Did you guys rotate it, or is that just the graphic?
We did rotate it. Now, this overlay, the two bars are, the previous emission was rotated just for the sake of comparison, but we did change the angle of the building. And then on the upper level, the program has remained largely the same. The one change that we were able to accommodate was because we lost one garage parking spot, we were able to install an elevated lift. So that's going to be connected to the garage space down below.
So that's interesting. So is that what we just generally know as a stacker that you will see in a
Correct.
urban parking?
Yep. So it was a chance to claim some of that space and get everyone what they needed.
Very nice.
Is it gonna be Carvana or something like that?
And again, here's the comparison. The upper level didn't change dramatically. Roof plan. You can see the green roofs are still a major component of the design. And then some renderings. So here's an aerial view looking from the south back at the house. The north elevation. So what we'd like to do is kind of conceal those garage doors in the wood cladding. Here's a view of the south elevation. And east. So these next two slides address kind of the history of our submissions to the board to date, starting with November 7th of 2018. And as you can see, there's been a downward trajectory in the overall scale of the project, both in terms of GFA. Now, with this last submission, we went up a little bit because of some of the logistics of moving program around. But overall, the building footprint has continued to be reduced in size.
When you reference the floor area, that also could include the second floor as well, right?
Correct,
Okay.
yes, and the lower level.
Right.
So let me, sorry to ask about the floor area. Did you count, because now you have a garage, right? Is that count as floor area in this number?
We counted everything, including exterior walls and garage mechanical space.
Okay, so in the previous one, it would have counted also, the garage
Correct.
parking, got it.
And I think this is the thing that this redesign addresses quite successfully, the soil and rock removals. So you can see previously we were at 3,500 to 4,000 cubic yards of anticipated soil and rock removals. We're now looking at 2,000 to 2,500 cubic yards.
Is that net, that's net? When you look at the, the cut and the spoil?
Correct.
So that's how much will go offsite?
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
And then, the green roof, as I mentioned, it's been a major component of the design from the beginning. It's kind of fluctuated in size depending on the roof area that we have to work with, but it's remained fairly consistent over time. And then this last series of slides addresses the 2002 approval in comparison with the elevations of our proposed house. And I think you can really see through these diagrams how the flat roofs help to minimize visual impact. You can also see how the house has been designed to work with the topography.
It's very tasteful.
This is the view of the south elevation, so this is the view that neighbors across the lake would be at least partially exposed to. I think you can see how, again, the flat roofs are less obtrusive than the gabled roofs. And also, the overall length of the building is less than the previous approval.
Didn't we also talk about the coloration too, in terms of what you're going to do with the siding?
Correct, yeah, I think it will really blend in. I do not know, I can't speak to what color this was. It appears to be some type of a stucco. But we're looking at like natural wood tones and deep slate.
What's represented in the 3D images, right?
Correct, yeah. And I'm going to flip through these next slides fairly quickly. They were part of our submission, so you've probably seen them already, but we included some sections of the proposed house. That red line is the existing grade through each of these sections. So this is that interstitial space that would slope down. This is a section through the north wing where we no longer have lower level
Is there
space.
a hatch below representing different rock that's there?
Yeah, it's kind of an estimation based on the soil borings that we have. And I think you've all seen this slide a number of times at this point, just a context map demonstrating that we're quite far from any of the other existing homes in the area. And these slides were all kind of featured on the comparison diagram, so we'll move through them. And at this point, I'll hand the presentation over to Dan.
You can raise the microphone, looked like it was a little low for you.
Thank you. Nice. All right, landscape. So, again, Daniel Thorpe, landscape architect for the applicant LaGuardia Design Group. So based on the revised building, we've been collaborating with Lori and her team on how to better fit the site design into the existing topography and soil strata of the site. So one of the biggest improvements we made to the landscape plan was, here's the bridge. Before, you came over the bridge and then you swept down into the subterranean garage. You now drive up, almost even with existing grade, up to a new parking area that's at the front of the house. So instead of the parking area, the main parking area being down below, the main parking area is up above. So this had several major impacts on the overall approach to the house. By the fact that the driveway is now climbing up, rising with grade, this retaining wall, which did in our previous submission did climb to almost 16 feet in height just to get down into the garage, now starts at around elevation at an even grade of about 0 and climbs to 6 feet high at its most. So it's a 10-foot reduction. Because the wall is now much smaller, we're able to treat the face of the wall a little differently. Instead of before we were struggling with the final finish of the wall. Now it can just be simple. We were thinking it would be simple plate steel clipped to the retaining wall system. So that thinner profile allows us to more room to plant, and the goal is to hide the wall almost entirely on the approach.
You had a grid on at one point that plants were growing up. Would that no longer apply? Can you just go with the steel?
I don't know that we necessarily need it at this point. I mean, the wall is only really 6 feet tall in a small spot across from the house. At that point, we have enough room to bury it in full height shrubbery.
With the reduction, and this might be someone else's jurisdiction in your presentation, but in the cover letter, despite the reduction in the cut and fill and the cutting away for the driveway, the letter from council still refers to blasting, at least twice. Are we still going to be blasting or just chipping?
So I don't know if that determination has been made yet, but one or the other will likely have to take place just given the rock on site. So I'm sure the contractors will have to look at that and decide what's most expedient and best serves the project. But
there's a difference in terms of what we look at in terms of chipping versus blasting. And of course, if you can do it by chipping, I think we would prefer that. And you're pretty far away from most homes, so it wouldn't be that disturbing. Blasting is a whole other level of permit and requirements, et cetera.
sure.
Probably would be more onerous for you. Obviously, it might take you to quit faster, I guess. But anyway.
If I could comment on some of the.
Sure, come on up.
Yep. So Heath Horn with Pruding and Company, Custom Builders. So there's some advantages, I think, to the blasting procedure. We could perform the permitting process, and we've gone through the permitting process on a number of projects prior. There's expediency, so if there is a level of site duration that we're trying to reduce the number of trucks that are in the time span in which that activity is happening, then blasting would expedite that. Also, the chipping noise level, it is a constant chipping that will happen and increase that time span for removal. So I think it will be partially I think that we would advise a client to move forward with the blasting permits and then make the determination as to what the most expedient way forward with it is once that removal's been done and exposed, so.
And is another part of it whether you're in solid rock or decayed rock?
Yes, so I think part of it is the excavation of the decomposed material and then an understanding of what bedrock is actually there and what needs to be removed.
So your borings told you essentially the rock profile, the top of the rock. You didn't bore into rock to find out.
No, we did.
You did?
Sorry. Doug Roy again from GZA, thank you. Yeah, we did bore into the rock, so there's the rock, the weathered or decomposed rock varies in heights as it normally does. So it's very hard to say from a 4-inch boring what we're gonna get across the site, but we have some idea.
Okay.
With 4 or 5 borings. So we did core rock in several spots. So there's rock that is, what we say is not rippable, so you couldn't go in there with an excavator and
Tear it
remove it.
up,
It would
right.
have to be either line drilled and chipped or drilled and blasted.
Okay.
One of the two.
Okay. Very good.
Okay, thank you. Back to planting, which is more,
The green stuff.
exactly.
So like I touched on earlier, we kind of reapproached this edge of the house in a different manner, given that we had more open space between the buildings now for all of our stormwater systems. On our prior application, the building was pushing them over into this side of the house, and since then, they've been relocated into an interior garden that the building would look inward towards. Another major improvement we made to the site design was the more sympathetic approach to the existing conditions of rock, specifically in this corner of the building envelope. The geotech data revealed that this was the hardest area of the site. So we've since pulled back on the spa. The spa projected outward from this area. There was building below here that has since been removed. And we're now embracing the rock and the aesthetic of the rock as part of the enclosure around the seating area.
That's the little vignette you would see if you're in that outdoor living space, up below, I'm assuming? Or like that-
Yep.
Yeah, that one. So
Yeah,
if
this
you're
is
in
just
the
a quick,
outdoor space-
this is a quick view I drew just to explain how we would be cutting into the existing rock and an acknowledgement of the height of that stone relative to the proposed first floor of the house. We're actually gonna take advantage of that height change as kind of a safety railing to keep people from that edge. But this is based, this rise of the existing rock is really based on the geotech data and the existing topography from the survey. The spa is interesting. Instead of it being a remote concrete structure projecting out into that stone area like our previous submission, it's now a prefabricated unit that would come fully enclosed with its own electrical and plumbing system, so all internal, which makes the installation much tidier. The rock face itself, we would plant within if needed to help stabilize any future runoff, which is shown in this photo on the bottom left. But yes, this would sitting in this room looking out. This is a vignette of that view.
Yeah, it's a nice view.
And then just getting back to the upper area, one idea is since we will be generating rock on site, how we might use that rock around the house. This is a concept that's kind of carried with all of our plans of bolstering this edge of the house that interacts with that existing flow channel with hardened stone stairs and the rock crushings being deposited along that edge to create a more stable environment for the water to run against, opposed to soft soil and plantings, which would inevitably probably blow out. This is a photo of our vision for the space between the buildings. These are all of our stormwater planters that are vegetated in native grasses, Pennsylvania sedge, native ferns like hay-scented ferns, and little magnolia trees. These are native to New York. They're the Sweet Bay magnolia. So these are these little trees dancing through here. So the idea of using all of the environmental devices we're employing on the site, using them as a visual expression around the building. Getting back to some of the more technical data, this is the coverage analysis that shows the previous development coverage was 31,844. The current development coverage has dropped about 5,000 square feet to 26,724 square feet. And I should note that the area from the street to the bridge is unchanged. We picked up all of that square footage in this zone by removing that lower parking area and all that additional driveway. This is just an updated tree removal plan showing the building footprint, and the trees in red are what would be removed, and in green are all the trees that we're revegetating with.
So I just want to ask one thing to make sure I understood.
Yes.
My button's right. So do you propose to expose this rock below that area where you're going to put the spa?
No,
Okay, it'll
No.
be just natural, just the way it is?
I'd love to leave it just the way it is.
Okay.
Um,
I couldn't tell from the picture if that
Yeah.
was one of the things that you were going to do below the ledge.
Yeah.
Okay.
Why do the two trees come out?
These two?
Yeah.
I don't know if those just escaped us as a holdover from the old application. I know we had added a few to the removals list because the board was concerned about the client maybe down the road wanting to remove a few to open up more solar exposure on the pool. So I do know we added a few for that reason. But we certainly look at keeping them on the plan.
So there's no need to remove those for construction reasons?
No.
I guess I would ask whether there's a need for us to ask them to be removed when it's within the grading limit line and the tree is, I'm sorry, the site is so heavily treed anyway. I know that there's some stipulations about how much tree removal is allowed in this area next to this lake, but I wonder if there might be a reason to offer some relief there. Just a thought.
And those trees would impact the sun on the pool? Because that's your southwest corner.
Right.
Two to
This
the
is
left, two
the
to the
afternoon. This is the afternoon
I
sun
think
coming
Dick
into
raised
the
that
house.
last time as, realistically, don't we expect that you might clear those later on? So if so, why not talk about it now?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, there's only two shown on the survey as being significant in this zone, so I think there are a lot of saplings in that area.
Yeah.
And then this again is just the plan from the bridge to King Street, largely unchanged, entirely unchanged, but I think at our last presentation, we didn't really get the opportunity to explain how we're now planting trees within the view shed from the neighbor's house.
That was a neighbor that was here at the
Right.
last meeting.
Right, and trying to address her concerns through adding trees and screening between her and the driveway. This is an existing pocket of vegetation, you see the clearing line around there, that was planted many years ago. It's good evergreen screening. So we looked at these other open vistas and how we could populate those with more canopy to give us
Also,
further
the
screening.
view from this end of the building seems to go right up to your building. And the elevations are pretty close. This is, I guess, at 5:30, and you're going to be building around at 515,
Right.
something like that.
Yeah, and if we go back to the three-dimensional renderings, we have a significant amount of planting between, on that side of the house.
Okay. Show me.
It's this one? No, it's the other one.
I think you're at least halfway there in my mind as to what should be done.
Yeah.
This one over
In
here.
that, this is
It's the
this
side
is
of the
gonna
house.
eventually be, you know, like the Mayans. They built something and then the trees, you know, came back and you
Yeah.
can't see the stuff anymore.
Right.
Which is great. But, and the building blends in nicely with all the views that you've created. And I certainly can see, you know, that view shed at the bottom, but the view shed on the bottom shows about 22 saplings all around it, unless there's something else.
Well, we have the opportunity within the grading and limit line to add more trees in this zone, which is that kind of angle of attack from the neighbor's house. So,
In our previous submission, we included a photographic view to the west from that side. And we concluded that you can't even see the existing house in a leaf-off condition when you're standing where the north bar would be. So I don't anticipate that there will be an issue.
That'd be great, but
That's
if you
revealing
could
right there.
bring, you know, a view shed photo and maybe put stuff in it and everything, then that might help you decide whether you have to add just a little bit or refine the way it is. Then we have a good record for us that says, hey, this is about all anybody gets. That's in there.
Which side would that be? Are there many glass, is there much glass on that side which will be lit?
No, the predominant,
Light down here.
yeah, so,
Where the light is gonna be.
Right.
yeah, so on the west side, the predominant glassy element would be that stair connector.
Okay. Yes, this one, right?
Yeah.
So is it this one?
Correct,
Okay.
yes.
So much
And
there.
that's not gonna be lit 24/7.
No, so there's not that much there anyway.
Right.
And you had an image up there before that showed how far the houses are from. How far are we from that house? I mean, it looks
490.
like you're 300 feet.
Over 400 feet.
490.
Almost 500 feet.
Yeah, there's a limit to
There's,
what.
there's a distance there with
Yeah,
500 feet.
oh, yeah, and a lot of the other houses are, you know, behind a bluff, you know, behind a you know, sharp upper piece of the rock, and they're farther away. I think the next closest one is, oh geez, it must be about 970, and then they get into 10, 100, 1100.
And we always worry about this, but I think maybe to Greg's point, there is really a point where you get to sort of reasonable expectations, and 400 or 500 feet away would be something that would be, you know, well, gee.
Well, particularly, you know, since there's this pocket here that shields it from the road,
Road, right.
and there'll be something here, but I'm just trying to, you know, think like I think we normally think for it, and I think that it's, maybe a better argument could be, you know, brought that says that, well, yeah, these two trees are really good for some other reason.
right.
Aesthetics, or I just don't know what, but I don't think they're very big because they're in the rock.
Right. Right.
Because trees are strong in the rock. I've been watching one for 10 years. The crack was that much to begin with. And now 10 years later, it's this big.
There you go.
And it's pushed the rock aside.
All right, so we can continue to look at that area. One other note before I jump off is that the swimming pool, the board had a concern with the depth, or maybe not a concern, but a comment about the depth of the swimming pool, and it's in our last presentation. We've since spoken with the owner about the depth of the pool and the idea that there's really no room around the pool to dive into the water, so we're now proposing the pool, instead of 8 feet deep, be 5 feet deep maximum, which again alleviates the downward pressure on the slope, and I think is a good thing for site impacts.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Will that be constructed on site, or is that also something that's prefabricated
That would be,
on-site?
that would be, have to be constructed on site as part of the foundation of the building.
Good.
Yep, Douglas? you wanna-
Take all your tools.
All right, great. That's the flip,
Well, not
and that's the
his.
point.
Yeah, definitely not his tools.
Sorry, Sabrina.
You may
The
not walk
tools.
with them.
Once again, Douglas Roy from GZA.
It's okay, though, we have the beeper when you walk out.
When you walk out, yes.
It's okay.
Then there's a
All the
detonation.
lights go off,
Yeah,
you know.
Isn't there a detonation?
And those trigger 4 more public
I
hearings.
do look pretty, I do look. I am pretty seedy looking, I know.
Yeah.
So as Dan cues this up, I will say that we have reduced it quite a bit. I'm not going to give you another lesson on geotechnical engineering, I
Right.
promise, unless you have questions. So with that, thanks, Dan. I appreciate it. So just a first plan view of the ultimate change we did, and that was reduction of this wall in both length and height, and I'll go through that a little bit. We still have some other areas we're going to try to reduce overall excavation by using rock bolts to retain and not use a 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 slope if we need to hopefully look at a benefit of reducing the overall excavation volumes from the site. So with that, I wanted to go a little graphic of the difference in where we had some pretty major excavation and changes in the retention or earth retention systems. So here, previously, we had used about 36 soldier piles. We had talked about what those look like and how those were installed previously. Here, we've gone down to from a 165-foot long wall to the maximum of 60 feet, and that probably could be reduced even more, depending on the system, because we don't have to excavate as deep, so we don't have to slope back as much and reduce that slope as much. So we got quite a bit of benefit by raising the grade coming up through here and reducing our overall footprint of this retaining system here. So I think this retaining system, might be an 8-pile system with some short, very short, 2-foot high walls on either end or something like that at this point. To look at the overall changes in elevation, and this is not the real trees that are out there, so as I think I told you there, it's just graphically. And my Bob the Builder here hasn't gotten taller, we've simply made the wall much shorter. So as Dan had said, we were at 16 feet previously. So we had about 1,100 square feet of wall face that we were talking about here, and we had this rock excavation and decomposed rock excavation here. We're now at 6 feet, and we've cut it down to about a quarter of what the total square footage of the retention is. So,
Yeah, it's much better. Is there going to be a way around the wall for children or something that come to visit, or, because if they're going to play out here and there's going to be a wall?
yeah, we'll still need some sort of, as we talked about, some sort of, protection fence and then
A railing or something?
railing and then cover or something over there.
All right.
I think, 6 feet is, it's still sorry. It would still be bad to fall off of,
Oh, yes.
But-
We have a limit, like.
yeah, but better than 16.
It's
So,
30 inches by code. Anything more than 30 inches.
so we'll have some sort of railing and/or fence there that will have to be landscaped across. Just that same wall, we're gonna use the same sort of composite wall, and we'll probably put a different facing on it, as Dan said, that something will be covered with landscaping.
With all the extra stone that you have available, might you consider a stone face on the wall?
We've
You're
talked
gonna be
about it a
producing a lot
little,
of rock, so.
yeah, we've talked about it a little bit, but there's also the handling of leaving it and where we can leave it on site, unless
Yeah, okay.
somebody wants to, put it in a pod somewhere. So leaving it on site's gonna be difficult to handle back and forth, so we're talking about it, and
Okay.
I'm sure we'll try to do that as much as possible. Just showing you the difference in wall heights here, between 6 feet and 6 feet. 16 feet and 6 feet.
Right.
Good. That's a good improvement.
That's it I have on that change, so.
Great.
Anybody
Great.
else has any
Perfect.
questions, let me know.
Nope.
Alan? Sabrina's tools are yours. Very clear.
Oh,
Alan has his own?
you can have both of those.
Alan's won't work.
He's afraid to take it.
I have the red one.
The red won't work,
Red's
I
no
know.
good.
because that,
Is it-
that clicker used to have,
Is it
it
only
has a
blue?
red. It's only blue on the screen. No,
Sorry, I'm like 9'4", like that.
only the blue ones that we have in here work.
You want me to hold something for you?
No, I'm fine.
You can use the table, Alan.
To stand on?
You
No,
ready
to
for
put your
president?
stuff on.
Just checking. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good evening. The last time I was here, and tonight too, I'm Alan Pilch, LP engineer, civil engineer on this project. That's great.
Is that what it's gonna look like?
Yep,
That's cool.
that's the new
Well,
Whippoorwill
more
Lake.
excavation there.
That's Whippoorwill Lake, and then the view. So this is, anyway, this is repeats. That's fine.
This is you, right?
Yeah. If it was, I believe so, yeah. Let's see what I have here. Yeah, it's fine. I wanted to start off with just showing the uniqueness of this, of the design, which incorporates, as you know, oops, let me try if I can get this correct now. I think you put the right ones in, correct? Yes. We'll figure it out. The green roof areas on the north bar, this is the regular roof of the, I guess that's the solar panels, correct, of the north bar. This is the drive right here, there's the parking area there. And these are the, not green roof, solar panel areas that'll be part of the, or just the regular roofs.
Those are
solar
green
panels.
roofs down below.
Okay, those are down below also. So, so that's the intention here. I wanted to at least show you what was there previously in the old, since we've done a lot of comparisons with the 1999 Chislehurst, when I was a much younger child, and 2002 site development plan approval for Terry Bozes. Just to sort of show you what was here, the west, what we called it, west of the bridge, there was all the runoff from the gravel driveway up to the bridge. There were 1, 2, and 3. There was another level spreader here. That's all that was done with the runoff. And on the this side of the bridge, there were 2 20-foot length, 4-foot, 4x4, 20-foot length 4x4 galleries for infiltration. That was all. There was no other treatment at all for drives or anything else that occurred there. So it was a very different, I'll say, manner in which runoff was treated on the prior project. And there was no peak rate attenuation either. The peak rate attenuation was done on the other 2 lots, the Hates Cross Road lot and the former Blyer, now Fitzsimmons lot at 725. That was it. That's all that was done. I just want to also show you what we had done. So all the runoff from the project site, and you can see the project site there, that's the property itself. And then what I did is define the drainage area going to the dam at Whippoorwill Lake, and we're right adjacent to it. It's a total of 406 acres in size, and it extends north to Marshall Lane and North Place, west to Cecilia Lane, and the town of Mount Pleasant. Kind of like on that side. And east of Frog Rock Road and Hates Cross Road and Breckenridge Road. That's the northern part of the entire watershed. And what we have done on our plan, this is like the drainage area map, and I'll just sort of use this to sort of illustrate what was done. What we have here are the green, the green roofs here, and then where we don't have the green roofs, what we have are stormwater planters between the bars that we're going to treat the runoff. The entire driveway, again, is pervious. It's going to be either PermaDrive, which is the successor product, as I call it, to FlexiPave, which is the pavement or the driveway surfacing that was used at 725 King Street, the other Chiselhurst lot. So that's the plan for it. On this side of the drive, we modeled it as being completely impervious, and we did provide 2 rain gardens in order to treat runoff from it. And we also provided locations where the subgrade would be benched in order to provide those areas that are greater than 5% in accordance with the stormwater manual. We showed areas where the subgrade would be benched to promote infiltration. So it doesn't just sheet off of the flow. And those areas were shown basically beyond the rain garden here, in this area, and also in this area here when you immediately come off of the bridge. Mr. Scioli discussed a couple other areas where we'll also include it as well. That was one of the comments that he had had. Again, that just shows the entire property, including the septic area on the lot. Again, I think here you can sort of see a little more detail of the stormwater planters between the bars. So what we have here, basically we have the green roof areas. So the treatment of the one-year storm, the water quality volume occurs in the green roof areas. Where there isn't a green roof, what we have are stormwater planters basically to do the non-green roof areas and also the connector bars, which will drain to the stormwater planters. The terrace below the property for the spa and the pool all drain to a infiltration facility on the east side of the building. And we also have a stormwater management facility, which is actually much smaller because we have so much less surfaces. As you know, the coverage is so much less that we're able to reduce the size of it. So that is actually here in the eastern portion of the bar, and it drains again, as it did previously, to a level spreader before, being treated in the wooded slope that goes down towards the lake. And that's really, we already saw this one with the rain gardens. Let me also say that one of the differences between this plan and the prior plan was by rotating the building and modifying the drives. In the former plan, we used to have stormwater planters on the north side of the building, but by rotating it and sort of, I'll call it regularizing the landscape between the north bar and south bar, what we're able to do very readily is create very naturalistic stormwater planters with, that sort of take advantage of the sinusoidal sort of design that Dan had incorporated into his plan. And that's how the stormwater management plan has evolved when we, had addressing the issues with the redesign.
Ellen, would you say, with your various treatments and the strategies here, would you say that the stormwater treatment is actually better now than it is as it exists out there naturally? That is, the treatment and the attenuation of the speed, et cetera, is as good or better than what we see out there right now?
When you say right now, I mean, we're talking
as
about
undeveloped.
on an undeveloped site?
Yeah,
I think it's basically equivalent to it.
okay.
Because, we have a decrease in the peak rate of runoff, and the volume of runoff is essentially the same going into the lake. So it's kind of like, almost like no change as a result. That's how I see it.
Okay.
It's just, as I say, peak rate attenuation is provided across all storms. And the runoff reduction volume of doing the green roofs and the stormwater planters and the infiltration facility means essentially just remains exactly what it is currently.
Okay. And the way you guys normally, design these things with 100-year, 50-year, 500-year storms, et cetera, those are all, well-defined. But for the unsophisticated person who says, is it designed for the gully washers that we seem to be getting here in these days, which is the 3-inch downpour inside of 45 minutes? How does this work? Is it going to take care of that kind of system as well? Because you guys have these defined storms, but the storms don't always meet your definitions. So how will that work, and how will that,
We only design the storms based on what the DEC recommends and what they have done and used and fashioned over the past several years. They do upgrade it, by the way. Alan can chime in. It used to be 7.2, now it's up to 9.23 inches for a 100-year storm.
for over what period of time?
That's for a 24-hour
24
storm.
hours.
So we also typically design the on-site storm drainage system for the 25-year storm interval. So you're not designing like the pipe-to-pipe for a 100-year storm. So what you'll end up with some surcharging in the pipe flow. But you actually design it so there's no surcharging, that is, the entire 25-year storm can be carried within the pipe without it rising, if you will, within a catch basin or flowing through. You know, that's essentially how it's done. So you design it with enough capacity to convey the entire 25-year storm
I believe
without it
it's
rising.
like
in the catch basin.
6.25, something like that.
Yeah, it's a little higher.
And
than
that's
that.
full amount.
It's a pretty substantial storm.
In the storms we get around here, you might get 1 inch, 2 inch over maybe 5-hour period.
Okay, well, we've had some stronger ones than that, but yeah, I think it's, you know, within an inch or two.
Anyways, I'll let you
Yeah.
entertain.
One other thing I had Alan do, and it's always above and beyond what the EC calls for, I had him do an analysis on all the runoff that's gonna come off the whole site in its entirety into that lake, just to demonstrate mathematically, and modeling wise and routing wise, what the increase in elevation is. And if he did all that, there's extra work above and beyond DEC's requirements. Because somebody who's keen on flooding, and I believe the amount of elevation rise in that lake is insignificant.
It's probably, you know, similar to the paper.
On the paper?
1/16 of an inch?
Yeah,
over
it's
the
even
whole
less than
lake.
that.
Yeah,
It's
that's-
pretty minimal.
Yeah.
It's not perceptible.
Right, that's exactly.
So, and that's how the process has
Great.
evolved.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. Well, I want to thank the applicant. From my standpoint, I thought it's really an extraordinary effort and extraordinary response to comments and concerns that we've expressed over the last several months. So we can only say that I wish many of our applicants responded in the same intelligence and honesty and perseverance.
quality.
And quality, yeah. Just a terrific job from my standpoint.
Yeah, I'd like to weigh in on that. I think that Bob and Greg are right. This is extraordinary for our experience here in terms of just the quality of the response and the willingness to, many people are willing to work with us. But it seems to me that the response that we've gotten to our comments has, in my view, dramatically improved to the things we worry about, and perhaps for your client also, improve the quality of the outcome, not just in terms of the site development, but the architecture also. And that's not for us to judge, but I think that there's probably, I hope that there's some of that in what's come out of the relationship. There's something else here which I think this demonstrates, and one of the unfortunate things that happens, and not just in this community, but everywhere around the country, is that there is a particular model, there is a particular paradigm for residential development for people who can't afford to build big houses, even smaller ones, which is what you see as a typical sort of developer architecture house, which is, they are almost always designed to be on a flat site. And we see this coming in over and over and over again in our community, which is a particular problem because all the flat sites are gone. And we end up in a situation where we have steeper slope sites that are more difficult to access, that require, in order to put a new house of that type on the site, they have to take off the top of the hill, which we don't allow them to do, so they'll take off the side of the hill. And the consequences to grading and drainage and all that, and for me, it's sort of an absurd way to build. And this particular project demonstrates to me the value of contemporary architecture. Please, let's recognize what it's good at and what it can do for us. And there are times when it's appropriate. And this is one of the times when it's appropriate. You break down the house in terms of essential elements and figure out how to sit it on the site in a way which is the most responsible way to do it, and you get a beautiful house out of it. at the same time, and the comparison of just the massing of this compared to the other house on this hillside in this neighborhood, and the extent to which that house would be seen from across the lake. And this will be seen a lot less, in my opinion, from across the lake, is dramatic and is noteworthy as a lesson for, you know, how if we had the authority to say, no, you can't do a Tudor mansion anymore, you have to do a contemporary house, and there are some models there's a Frank Lloyd Wright house right across the street from you guys, maybe you don't know it, but a beautiful Frank Lloyd Wright house, which is in the Usonian neighborhood right across the street. Another perfect example that nobody seems to take as a model for how to do these things. And so I commend you, and I think it's great to have you guys come in. I think it's been terrific. We have been excoriated for putting applicants through, you know, many meetings and many cycles of meetings, and a lot of times it's not just our particular, what we would like to see. Many times it has to do with the technical aspects to be sure the drainage is right and all these other things. But in this particular case, I'm sure it's taken longer than you would have preferred. But I think that it's been worthwhile, and I think it's a credit for us anyway, and I hope for you guys. I think it's a credit to the process and a credit to us working as a team. And I think it's important to say that publicly because I think it's a good model for us to be able to point to. So I thank you, and I think it's a very fine project.
And so they only have to come back 2 more times?
At your peril.
We're not done yet. We have a couple of comments, I think, from Sabrina and Bob and Dennis.
Not many.
I know.
Not many.
Okay, you want to go first?
Sure. Ultimately, they've addressed all of my comments. You know, one thing that you did last time was you identified the number of truckloads. I think it will be helpful for comparison to include the number of truckloads you anticipate coming into and out of the site for the overall impacts. As the applicant stated, the request for the exceedance in the development coverage has been reduced. There is still about approximately 5,000 square foot overage compared to what was before. It's much less than when they originally came in. And those are really the only 2 comments that I have. That is part of your approval, you would be recognizing that overage in development coverage. But it's still well within the code requirements of
Right.
coverage.
And it's reduced about 50% from the last time.
Correct.
So we would want number of truckloads and a frequency per day or something?
Correct.
Yeah, I was going to ask that. Do we know the number of truckloads that might be involved?
I think it depends on the process of removal, chipping versus blasting.
I think if
Not
you,
much. Can't be much different.
is there a
I'm sorry, quantity or the time frame?
The
Quantity. Time frame is, we understand that would be different.
Yeah, no,
We're
quantity.
hopeful that you'll get all the rock that you blast. That won't go too far.
Otherwise, your insurance should be upgraded right now.
Yeah, quantity, so quantity on the new proposal is greatly reduced from of rock removal is greatly reduced. And originally, we were at 3,500 to 4,000 square feet, cubic yards approximate of removal. And now we're estimating closer to 2,000, 2,500.
And how big are the trucks, 20 yards?
So the trucks will be 20-yard trucks, but we'll likely have to do reduced size loads
For the bridge?
to deal with the bridge weight.
But that's only H20 or something
Yeah,
like that.
yeah, so we have to figure out what the.
Okay,
Right,
so-
like previously you had said it was between 175 and 220 loads going in and out.
Right,
And so
assuming
the
it's
question
one
is,
unit.
what has that been reduced to, just for comparison's sake?
So I think that we didn't know the bridge loading requirements previously, so I think that to be safe, we should aim, or our maximum is gonna be somewhere around 12 yards per truckload. So I think we have reduced the number of truckloads, but not drastically in the.
All right, so providing that information, you know, for in the resolution would be helpful for us to do a comparison of what you were and, you know, indicating on the plans what it should be, you know, with the loading, the truckload weight should be versus how many loads should be coming in and out. It really helps identify for the neighbors what to expect.
Right, and we received a letter from your engineer about the bridge. Can you speak to that and just clarify for it? Come on up. Whoever's responsible on the team for the bridge.
Somebody needs to come to the
So-
mic.
So the representatives from Silman are not here tonight. Is there a specific question you have? And maybe if it's a focused question, someone here might be able to answer it.
I had comments on that as well, but
Okay, I had a question in terms of what we can expect the future longevity of the wood bridge to be.
It's wood and steel.
Well,
Wood
no,
deck.
but the deck itself is wood, so it's what, 2x8s, 2x10s, do we know what it
it
is?
says it on the plan.
Okay,
2x8 or
2x8s, yeah.
It's clearly on the as-built.
Right.
Which they should provide as well.
Right.
And I think that's why they recommended protecting it. from
Yes.
Construction.
But even so, after the wear and tear, et cetera, but I mean, it is still wood, it's pressure treated, I guess. What's the expectation in terms of it sustaining its strength in the future? Is it 5 years, 10 years, 15,
And
20?
that bridge was built how many years ago?
After
Okay.
2002.
With no maintenance.
Yeah. So I don't know if that's something you want to try and opine on, Heath, or
Yeah, I mean, we would develop a protection plan along with the selected subcontractor that was gonna be performing the excavation and site work, whether or not that's, a rubber protection mat system or some sort of, more, other wood-type-based decking that goes on top of it. But in terms of the longevity of it, I couldn't comment on
Yeah.
what the future.
I think we should get that from your engineers.
Sure. That's what I recommended.
Oh, okay.
If it'll be respect to the contractors, it's gotta come from an engineer stamped and sealed.
Sure, absolutely. We'll get that to you.
Yeah, because I think the issue here is, emergency services response 10 years from now, what's going to happen? Yeah. That's all I had about the bridge. Anyone else?
Great.
Bob?
You want to talk about the bridge, or you want to talk
Matter
about?
of the fact the stormwater report looks good, I still have comments.
Yes. Oh, I know you have comments. Sabrina, were you finished?
I am done.
Okay.
Yep.
ST1, I have some comments on the porous pavement that it went over with Alan. There's some additional areas they have to bench. Anytime the grade that exceeds 5% with the porous pavement, and there's quite a few areas that do, they gotta bench it so the water infiltrates properly into the ground as opposed to running along the surface on an incline and not going anywhere except coming out to the bottom, which is a big problem. So A, B, and C are those items I'd like to see addressed on the plan for the profile. ST2 is a standard note, obviously it's more than 5,000 square feet of disturbance. They have to get the acknowledgement letter from DEC on this. ST3, due to the extensive nature of the stormwater facilities, I highly recommend that they put up performance guarantees and maintenance guarantees for all of the stormwater throughout the site. ST4 is along the same lines due to the extensive maintenance that's gonna be required, specifically for the green roofs, as Dennis articulates in his memo. I think it's very important that that'll all be in there, and be looked at as like any other tree maintenance plan or wetlands mitigation. And put it for so many years as recommended by either Dennis or you. So that's ST4. Then I have my general comments. These are a bunch of conditions that were put in the old resolution, which I believe they agreed they will address and implement into this new resolution as conditions as well. G2, they submitted conceptual supports excavation plans. In light of the fact the wall has reduced in size substantially, they still have to submit detailed construction drawings stamped and sealed by a PE, showing all the types of details that will be required for the construction of the wall. And there's notes we like to see on the plans regarding the inspection services, and it's critical in this particular case that the applicant understands that all this has to be inspected by the Geotech company and signed off to that effect in light of the fact we go out and do general conformance inspections as well. So those notes A, B, C, and address it, which should be on the structural plans. G3, water service, I would recommend that they show good plans and details and sections on where the existing water service ends. I believe years ago, when they did this, Basis had put in a hydrant on the west side of the bridge. That should all be shown and how that's gonna be connected. And also too, more importantly, how it's going to be connected on the superstructure of the bridge below the deck. We have some plans of that bridge, and it says any type of additional structures that go on the bridge, i.e. utilities, must go by echo, so you might want to have your engineer reach out to them to make certain when they're doing that, the loading is taken into account.
Can the water loading be saved for last? You know, or get a lot of the trucks over and the blasting first? How's that sequence going?
Depends how they sequence it and when they build it.
Yeah.
You would need some kind of water supply on site for the duration of construction for various activities, so.
Well, how many gallons a day would you use?
I mean, it could be a minimal setup where we run something that's a much smaller line and smaller capacity across the bridge.
There you go.
They can do like a bypass system, bring it up there on a temporary basis.
Yeah, you could put it off to the side on a temporary basis too. Just, okay.
G4 with the letter, I have some comments on the letter that was submitted by Silman Structural Engineers. At the very least, they should provide all the photographs that they took to base their opinion on the bridge being in good shape. They should attach copies of the original bridge drawings and calculations in their report, and the revised letter must be signed and sealed by a licensed PE. And he said he signed it, but it wasn't stamped. It has to show his license number. And the recommendations as mentioned in said letter regarding the protection of the wood decking during construction should be shown on the plans and prepared by a PE and incorporated on that plan as well. Street address is 767, not 780, so they gotta change that, minor. G5 is a permit that's gonna be required by the state because of all the heavy truck traffic coming off that site during the rock removal. I'd highly recommend that you get the standard signs along the state DOT roadway of King Street about the trucks entering roadway. You're gonna need a highway work permit on that, that's GC5. G6 has to get an individual residential stormwater permit, IRSP from the DEP. And obviously, you'll have to require the Westchester County Department of Health regarding the on-site wastewater treatment system for the residents. And that's it.
We're expecting that the expansion area will be required to be built at this time. I mean, the access is going to be very limited, right?
Not unless they get a fill waiver from the county, but there's no guarantee on that.
Right, of course.
This is one of those, I would hope that this is, and maybe I'm off base here, but I hope this would be one of those situations where, looking at the nature of the site, that one would require that work be done, but because it has impacts in order to do that maybe they would say, okay, you just certify that this is the place that's gonna happen if it has to happen, and that might be the appeal that you use in that case.
Seems to make sense.
Right.
I agree.
Alan, will you be going for that waiver? Will you apply for that when you go for
If we
the?
would, I'll speak to Peter Gregory about that too, because he's the one who's involved with that.
Yeah, okay.
Check that out.
And again, that has to come after the BP's issued, then they go and take a look at it, as you know, Alan. And the county makes a determination whether it's feasible or not, after the BP's issued.
It's already been permitted, so they,
Mhm. Right, after when they start construction.
No, I'm just saying, with regard to the septic system, you had a permit to construct it. So, we'll check that out.
Okay. Dennis, you had some comments?
I think some of them possibly could be addressed. I think it was alluded to during the presentation, just some of the inconsistencies with respect to one sheet versus the other, just to, have clarity on what's remaining, what's being removed, and then, that obviously, not that I would require more replacement, but just so that I could follow the sequence of, obviously, there was a lot of reductions in a lot of other areas that, were documented and quantified, and this is just to carry that through for, clarity and consistency purposes. And I guess I know there was the earlier discussion, with respect to irrigation systems due to the sizes of the trees and, not necessarily gonna require staking for every tree, but, if something needs to be, I guess now's the time that we should just review and address those types of items before, at the end of a project.
So that's a detail that you can work out with the applicant, a supplement that will show the staking where it's necessary?
I'd like to see a plan. I think most of the trees are 4-inch caliber, so I just want to see, what you're thinking about and under what type of conditions you would, look to potentially stake a tree,
Right.
just considering the
Okay.
rock and the slopes, the potential exists, so we just sort of have to recognize, acknowledge that. And then, I admit to, not coming from a background and being a green roof expert, so, but I just felt like gut reaction that a lot of the application that I had, come to know really, this usually is not the setting that I associate with, sort of, in the middle of the woods next to, a pristine lake. It, has more, doesn't mean it can't apply here, it's just from, an urban application, I'm like, what would special considerations be with respect to plants, maintaining plants, depths of soil, all those things, and I just was fortunate enough to happen upon this study that, I thought did a nice job of expanding your options as opposed to DEC listing 11 plants and most of them from the same genus. I'm like, okay, well, if that doesn't work out, then where does that leave us, So, just, some consideration, which I think, your client may have some interest. I know all the renderings kind of show putting greens, and if that's what you want up there, that's fine, but, I think considering all that went into a lot of the landscape, at the end of the day, I could see somebody saying, it would be nice up there, and they wouldn't want to see putting green, so I'm just sort of calling out that, it'd be nice to sort of see what you're considering, what you're proposing, and then that, as Bob pointed out, kind of plays into, if you're gonna determine, cost of a bond, then, it helps to know like what you're looking to put up there, so we could sort of just get, an idea as to how to calculate that.
Good. Yeah, it was very interesting, the article. It's more interesting than Alan's stuff.
All that Latin, really? I'm surprised.
Hey, what is this? Huh? I have a comment in the comment area. Dennis has got some good ideas. I think that your team has put together some other good ideas for environmental improvements, solar energy, the green roofs, making sure you have enough percolation area for the water and everything else. And I think that's all good, and I particularly am moved by the comment that we'll have more empathy for rock. And I'd like to know how that turns out. I've never had any detailed discussions with a rock and received anything.
But you've been watching yours for 10 years.
Watching, I don't dare comment.
You haven't met my mother.
And lastly, I think that Frank Lloyd Wright would be happy with this. This is one of the concepts he had for a building in Arizona, in Phoenix. And the glass is much better. And I don't think he had any caulking that worked, but there's now lots of caulking that will work and a way to seal the water out. So I think that if he could come back, maybe he would be further, moved, better than a rock, with empathy as to what could be done.
So, just getting, first of all, I don't want to slight the landscape architecture here, because I think it's excellent too, and the ones that come to my mind are the ones from my generation, a little bit earlier, Dan Kiley and Pete Walker, and, these, some of whom I had the fortune to know, good fortune to know. The thing, just to put a pin in this, Frank Lloyd Wright did many houses out in the prairie, Roby House, I mean, this great, big, gigantic thing. But when it came time to build in the woods, he did falling water. And those are the two different, approaches to solving a problem related to the site. And again, I think that that's really, really an important lesson for us. And getting back to caulking guns. And this is going to be a personal story, forgive me. Oh, you guys are the only applicants, so we're going to have to sit here for this. So my first job as an architect out of school was working for a architect in Los Angeles. His name was Ray Kapp. He just recently passed away, but he was a brilliant residential architect. And his houses were all made of stone and glass or wooden glass, mostly wooden glass, and they were like tree houses in the woods. And he did a lot of his work in the Pacific Palisades area, which is just gorgeous there, the canyons and so on. and just a lot of glass. And the guy who was his job captain kept a caulking gun at his desk. Because sure enough, they were going to get a call from a client at least once a week. Hey, my roof is leaking. And so, or the windows are leaking, and Clelio was the guy's name. He was Italian, Clelio Baccato. He'd pick up his caulking gun and go, caulk the windows and caulk the roof again. So, these things, obviously, they happen. Water's an architect's worst friend, worst enemy. The other thing about Clelio was that he was Italian, and he was like first generation. And in these houses, they're in the woods, and they're like a lot of glass, and the birds would just come flying into the glass, sparrows in particular. So every time he went to the house to caulk, he'd look for the sparrows that had just fallen, and sparrows are a delicacy in Italy, so he'd bring the sparrows home.
So these are benefits that we're offering to you if you would like to partake.
So enough of that, sorry.
Do we have any comments from the public on this? Okay. You did it. Not seeing any, is there a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. And we have a number of conditions that you'll need to work on, but I think Bob and Dennis and Sabrina, are we comfortable with those items that you've outlined in your memos as conditions that we can put into a resolution?
I have no
Yes.
objection
Okay.
No
with my
objection.
comments.
Okay, Dennis?
Yes.
Okay, great. So what we can do is direct staff to draw up a resolution. Doesn't mean you have to come for that from Long Island. The lawyer does. But, we'll draw up a resolution, and I don't know what the time frame might be for that. Do you, Sabrina? We have our March 3rd
March
and
3rd.
17th are the two meetings.
I think we can shoot for March 3rd, and if we need more time, we can then put it on the 17th.
Yep, okay,
But I'm pretty sure we can do it by March 3rd.
great. Okay, is there anything else we need to do, Jennifer, at this
No.
time?
You guys did an excellent job.
Thank
Take
you
the
very
rest
much.
of the night
Thank
off.
you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate all of your time that you spent on this with us. So,
Check with you just for a minute
sure.
while we're doing the next thing.
I'm gonna jump to minutes.
Yes. Yes, thank you.
Have a nice evening.
And
Yeah,
I would
thank you.
like to say, just real quickly, we're printing new copies of the code for you. The version you have before you was not the right version.
Okay, thank you.
So I need to collect them all back, so you don't confuse things.
Is this two?
Yes.
This version?
Yes, give that back. Yep.
No good. No good. Wrong draft.
Dicker's already eaten his or something.
Save those clips. You don't throw those clips
I'm
out.
not throwing the clips away.
Those all the time.
Oh my goodness, relax.
I'm sorry, you want this part?
Stuff over the weekends.
Do you see this?
No, it's just, it's the wrong version.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You have one too, or no?
I did, I'm sorry. But she has it now.
I think that's really,
Did I give you mine?
what a great solution.
Yeah, I took it.
You took mine? Here's Dennis's.
Nothing like wasted paper.
Just incredible.
Is it double-sided?
Paul
It is.
Abraham,
Oh.
the applicant,
I know, I could use it as notes.
Yeah.
as thoroughly.
Take the little ones, one,
You
the
like the
little,
little ones?
and I have one and one.
It can be
I
done.
have plenty, there's plenty.
First of
These
all,
are standard ones. I need one.
That was great.
You can order them. I just want you to know, there's a whole stockpile. Do you ever go into supply closet?
Oh, okay, and they came up with a better solution. This.
No, you're in the supply closet.
Zach, get upset about that paragraph that I just talked to him about yet. Let's see. The rear one? Yeah, it's the rear one. I told him it sucked.
Oh, okay.
I was very polite,
Oh, okay.
very polite.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So do you wanna do minutes, or do
Yes,
you wanna do?
let's do minutes. Our first item
Minutes.
is, well,
Yeah, first and only.
you know, the minutes of December 17th, and other than labeled in the agenda as December 21, but they're really December 17th.
Are they?
Yeah.
Okay, we're cooking with gas tonight.
I got labeled December 17th.
Yeah, the label 17th, but the agenda showed 21.
Okay, got it.
I don't know why I missed that.
This is the one that was short.
Well, we were missing pages, yeah. The last 3 pages were missing.
Okay.
So Felicia got those over to us. Okay,
So December 17th, any
correct.
comments?
I had a couple of comments if I'm working on the correct draft.
Your guess is as good as
I
mine
know
at
that.
this point.
But on page 2, line 7, the town board issued a draft finding. Well, I'll just submit these.
If you want to.
It'll just,
I didn't have any comments.
just drive me real crazy. I had a couple of minor comments, I just sent them in.
Okay, awesome, thank you. All done.
Thanks, Bob. Anyone else, any issues, questions? Okay. If not, is there a motion to adopt the minutes of December 17th that you haven't seen because it'll be changed slightly?
As
But,
amended.
As slightly
As
modified,
amended.
modestly modified?
As amended.
As amended, yes, so moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And we have the January 7th minutes. Anyone, any questions?
I don't have anything on these either.
No, all good on this
I
one.
had just one on page 3, line 14, there was a repetition of 2B.
I'll be right back.
So at the very end of it, we can take out the second 2B. That's all I saw. Anyone else, anything? Okay. Very good. Is there a motion to adopt the minutes of January 7 as amended?
Motion? Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
And Mr. Curley
Removed himself.
removed himself.
Was he? Okay, good. Yeah, he was, we were here. Okay, we now come to a discussion item. This is a referral to us from the town board, the scoping document for the town board legislative action on the Chappaqua Hamlet form-based zoning code.
I took your code, you were gonna move your vote.
I'll be back in first.
Okay.
Thoughtful of
Yeah, we did.
Tom's not here, I'll make you sit.
Am I starting this, or am I waiting?
I think we want to just wait for
Everyone seems to be leaving.
everybody in.
Well, I'm sure, I'm glad this has so much attention in town.
Bob, thank you for your comment.
Oh, okay.
And Tom wrote comments as well, so.
Yeah, I didn't get through his. I saw that he
No,
said.
they're very good.
Visual. Okay, I know that's important.
Well, anytime you can find a quorum, let me know.
I guess one is no good.
What's that?
One is no good.
No, apparently not.
Okay, now I'm sold. Right, I can care less.
This reminds me of the years in the late 90s when we had
You know, like how the edges get dry.
several meetings where people just didn't show.
Yes, yeah.
Yep, trains didn't make it.
On the palette, it was like.
People tied up in
smoothest
meetings.
voice. There was, there's a few taste experiences I've had in life where I'm almost like transcended. And I remember that still to this day. That was like one of them. It makes life worth living. I always tell everybody, it's like something as simple as that. It's just. Absolutely.
Are we off mic?
No, we're not off mic, we're just
Taking a pause.
Taking a pause. Okay.
killing the viewership.
We should get up and do a little dance or something. Your telethon,
There goes the Nielsen.
right down the tubes. Ah, tell a joke.
Oh. There comes Dick. Okay.
Come on, Greg.
Well, we can start, yeah.
He's close at hand.
Is he?
Yeah, I saw him outside.
He's right there.
He's right there.
Ah.
Waiting on on you.
Especially if you
Is
fill
it
in.
snowing?
No,
I'm not sure who he was doing. Really,
Are you sure? Go back and check.
it looked like it was snow.
It's a courtesy to give it to them.
This is very, very bad now. We got one guy watching rocks for 10 years. I don't know, looking at snow that's not coming down. This is,
If you look outside, the sidewalk looks like it's covered in snow, it's just the lighting.
oh, okay.
Oh,
Much improved lighting outside, out back.
What a high kill.
we're in the outback?
Well, thank
Did they fix the steps? Because the steps are, those are treacherous going out there with the light.
Really?
There
new
should be
steps
more
to back.
light
You mean the
down
new
there,
steps?
yeah.
Which
Yeah, the new steps. Sure.
Yeah.
Really tough.
Okay,
Whatever, here we are.
All right.
We are working for you. Welcome. Well, the planning board has received a referral, as the chairman stated, regarding the form-based code legislation that the town board is currently taking through the state environmental quality review process. I'm here tonight, I'm gonna kind of give you just kind of a quick run through. We're in the process right now called public scoping, and you folks out of all of the boards that I'm speaking to are the most familiar with scoping. So just to give you a sense, project background, 2014, the town produced the public engagement report, where we went out and we extensively surveyed and spoke with the community about their hopes, dreams, likes, dislikes for the town of Newcastle. In 2017, we compiled the comprehensive plan update, where we took what the public had told us, we updated the 1989 document and created new goals and action items for the community to help meet the needs of today and into the future. In 2018, the town board issued a moratorium on certain building and development in the Chappaqua Hamlet in the commercial zones. And in 2019, the town board contracted with a consultant team consisting of Kimley Horn, Tortegalis, and partners Russ Group and Joel Russell to assist with developing a new zoning code for the Chappaqua Hamlet. In 2019, the consultant team had outreach meetings with emergency services, the business community, the historical society, the town department heads, and other folks to get a sense of their feelings about a new code, what they would be looking to do, all the while being consistent with the goals and objectives of the comprehensive plan. In 2019, the town board also appointed a downtown working group. That downtown working group consisted of the town board, 3 members of the planning board, 2 a local architect, 2 members of the development community to work with the consultant and folks from my office to develop draft legislation. We had the kickoff for that in May, and in July, we had a community meeting to also talk about proposed legislation. We had 2. We had community meetings to really talk with the public about the new legislation and what it would do. So a form-based code, it's different than the zoning we have today. Today we have what's called Euclidean zoning, it's zoning by use. The form-based code is a little bit different in that it addresses the relationship between buildings and the building facades and the street. It's the public realm, the relationship of a building, what's next to that building, the buildings across the street. So it's a little bit more holistic in looking at a street and a block form. The regulation itself is different. Right now we have a zoning code which is just words. The form-based code will actually be words, it'll be a plan or a regulating map, and it will also consist of other visual tools. There'll be pictures of architecture, diagrams of street formation. So it's a little bit more content rich, if you will, in several different forms than today's zoning code. So this gives you a sense of the zoning in the Chappaqua Hamlet today. The form-based code covers the business retail zoning district, the business retail parking zoning district, the planned industrial zoning district, and the design business district. These are the areas and the extent today in zoning in our hamlet. And then there's another chart right here, which really calls out the stories within the existing zoning district. So for each of the zoning districts, what the maximum stories or maximum height is.
Would you point out 91 Bedford Road?
91
Is
Bedford.
it BR or is it just
It
outside?
is in BR right
The edge
here.
of BR.
It's right there.
Right up
Right there.
Thanks.
So, to be more specific, the form-based code is dimension and architectural standards. One of the biggest changes is the height, the definition of how you measure height and what the allowed height is. This map shows the difference in height. So right now, 3 stories are in the pink. We have 4 stories over in the purple, and an area of 5 stories. And if you look at the area of 5 stories, it is mainly on town-held property. And that means that where we sit today in Town Hall, there's an area within the Town Hall property, in really the inner road leading from the train station. That area is allowing on the road frontage 5-story buildings. So it's not the entire property, it is just an area that fronts what would deem to be a street, and then around the circle. The only area of privately held property where we are looking at 5-story frontage would be a little bit on Woodburn and Greeley in this corner. An area on Greeley that leads up to the bridge that is privately held here but publicly held here. And then an area on Greeley which on the other side of the bridge, which is privately held here and again publicly held in here.
Sabrina, excuse me 1 second, a question. When we talk about frontage, since we're talking about form-based code, is there also a depth that we're talking about as well that will be, you know, if we have 5 stories here, what does that mean in terms of what the depth of that
That
5-story?
building
Yeah,
is.
exactly.
I believe that there is a depth of the building, I don't know it offhand, but the code does contain the dimensions for
Which will
that.
be a minimum, say, for a 5-story structure in a given place.
Right, 75 feet, you know, and Tom, in your comments, you specifically spoke about depth. So if it's not in the code now, it's something that will be subject of the GEIS and that, you know, will either not be put in the code or be put in the code at the end of the environmental impact.
And there's another thing to note, that even though form-based may let you go to 5, the building code also kicks in. And you have to meet certain criteria to
Right.
get the building code up that high too. So just because form-based may let you do it, if you don't do it per the building code, you might be limited to 3 or 4 depending on your type of
Right, there's different
construction,
fire and safety
sprinkler, and all the
measures.
other stuff, right.
Right, so again, this is the base legislation. This does not replace state building code requirements. It does not replace environmental code requirements, so this is like zoning today. Let's talk about SECRA. So you guys are very familiar with SECRA. You know, the intent is to assess the environmental significance of all actions. The lead agency is the town board. They are the lead agency in this effort to rezone the Chappaqua Hamlet. And their charge is to balance the environmental impacts with the social and economic factors when determining whether or not they want to pass this legislation. This is really for the public state that's watching. We're going rogue. We're really going rogue here. This is the website for the SECRA information on DEC's website. There's a lot of helpful information if folks want to learn more about SECRA on this website. So this is, I apologize for the magnification of this slide. It's really meant to demonstrate that we have a process to follow. The town board has gone through certain steps of that process. We are now at scoping. Scoping is the beginning of putting together a generic environmental impact statement, and there is a process that must be followed to get to the end of this. So we are smack dab in the middle, I would say, but there's still a lot of work that has to occur between scoping and between preparing a draft and generic environmental impact statement. So that's what this slide is intended to do.
Sabrina, I have a question for you. During that process, from the middle to the end, is the draft's gonna be reviewed too, to go to 3, 4, 5, and 6?
Correct.
Concurrently?
Correct, yes, yes. We can get into more details about what is looked at in the scope when we get to the end of this, but absolutely, Bob.
Good question.
So proposed action. So we're looking at a proposed action which is an amendment of the town zoning code. We're within the Chappaqua Hamlet. We're looking to move to a form-based district that is consistent with the goals of the comprehensive plan. 72 acres of land are affected by this zoning change, and we're looking for flexibility for development with the intent to revitalize the hamlet, create a sustainable and successful mix of commercial and residential uses, taking account of current and future real estate markets and trends. Again, we're trying to revitalize the Chappaqua Hamlet. That is the main goal of the form-based code. So more specifically, the proposed action includes examination of the regulating plan and the regulations that are within the draft code, the development standards, the architectural standards, the definition, and the development review and approval process. So the code that exists on plan newcastle.us will be subject to analysis in these areas. In addition, the proposed action also includes a build-out scenario. So there's a description of assumptions regarding a future build-out scenario, and this is maximum potential development, okay? Because seeker requires us to look at the maximum impact. We're looking at residential build-out, we're looking at commercial build-out, and we're looking at vehicular, pedestrian circulation, and parking in association with that build-out analysis. We will also look at open space, natural areas, and historic features relative to the build-out analysis, and we will look at utilities, sanitary, water, and stormwater. This is the entire proposed action. Okay? Yes.
How would the town historian be involved in this?
He was circulated as the Historical Society was circulated as an interested agency. To review the proposed scoping document. One of the entities who the consultant team met with prior to producing the legislation was the town historian.
And they participate in the cultural
Yes, they do.
part of the review.
Yes, they do. So,
I have a question on that page.
sure.
On the full build-out studies, that's full build-out.
Correct.
Do they ever do a study that says, well, maybe we only build out that block? I mean, do we ever get a
Yes,
partial or
we do.
phased?
Yes,
Okay.
we do. So let's go to this next slide.
I
What?
would actually,
Go back.
now that I asked one question, I had thought of another one that's related. The way I look at it, first of all, that there's no carve-out for the Greeley house, or did I miss that in the drawings?
There's no carve out for the Greeley house.
So it's gonna be demolished?
No, it's not.
Okay.
No, this is a zoning. This is zoning.
It's not a development plan.
It's not a development plan. This full build-out maintains the Greeley House. The build-out that will be conducted,
Because it's a cultural
because it is a
location.
landmark.
Okay, well, that's another good issue.
Right. So what is scoping? It's to focus the draft environmental impact statement. It's to eliminate non-significant, non-relevant issues. It's really to identify the extent and the quality of information that's needed in order for the lead agency to make a decision. It is intended to identify the range of reasonable alternatives to be discussed. So Greg, when it gets to your point of do we ever do anything in between, that gets to the range of reasonable alternatives. And we look at it to provide initial identification of mitigation measures. So again, we know parking is a big issue. If we don't rezone X, Y, and Z area, what does it do to parking? So all of that information has to be put into the generic environmental impact statement so the lead agency can understand the impacts and changes and how those changes would affect the impacts. And it also provides the public with an opportunity to participate in identification of the impacts. So here's the general sections. This is very general. The draft scoping document that you have goes a little bit deeper than this in certain sections. I've been receiving comments from the public. Staff has been reviewing this. We've been adding more detail. Because it doesn't have detail does not mean that it is not going to be discussed, but if there's areas within the scope that you want to ensure are discussed, then they will be highlighted. For example, Greg, your question, the alternatives. It's not just no build out under existing zoning and full build out. It's build out by removing the 5 stories. It's build out by reducing the area of the zoning on King Street. These are all the alternatives have been expanded upon, largely due to public comments. Largely due to, we need to understand what the impacts of the parking are. We need to understand the impacts of the traffic circulation, of the view shed. So when we look at this zoning code, there are a couple of areas that jump out as potential significant impacts. The visual and the transportation. Okay, those are two, I would say, top issues for impact. And there's a lot of detail that I am putting into the scope in those areas due to public comment, due to staff review, and other input into this scope. So we are still in the draft scoping
I have an
process.
administrative question.
Sure.
We're looking at this on February 4. It was just issued by the town board, January 20th, something like that. My question is how, I'm looking at the cutoff, it's February 7th, which is Friday.
It is
for-
February 14th for
Oh, they-
written comments.
oh, they changed it?
Yes,
Oh.
because they continued the public scoping session from January 28th to February 11th, and they have requested written comments by February 14th.
So I want to,
Well, before I leave that, maybe we don't meet again until, when do we meet again? 18th, right?
Yes.
Is it possible that we as a board
Oh, thank you.
can look at this one more time? Well, we need an extension. The bottom line is,
You need to
because we can't
request
do
an
it.
extension.
Right, because
So
it's,
your board needs to pass something that requests that the town board consider
I just
an
think that,
extension.
based on prior scopes that we've done,
Still hot.
yes,
That's done.
Thank you, Felicia.
rather than just have individual people writing off, I think would be important for the planning board to really give this some good weight and consideration. And
Are
for
we
us
allowed to
to,
have a work session?
well, that's what I,
Yeah.
work sessions, we need more than just tonight.
Right.
And here we are, just receiving this hot paper and the latest draft. Dick has not had any look at this at all.
Right.
Tom and Greg and I have looked at this before because we're on this committee. So
Thank
pay
you.
attention,
Thank you,
Dick.
gentlemen, for taking on that burden.
But seriously,
That's
it
all
would
yours
be,
now.
so we should do that, that's the way, would that be the
Yeah, your
mechanism?
board would have to,
Make a request.
ask,
And
just request.
just to put a sort of a bookend on the time frame, in secret, there is a deadline.
Yes.
So the town board has 60 days to make any revisions to this draft scope. Otherwise, the draft scope essentially becomes the scope.
Do you know when the
So-
clock started ticking?
Yep, it ends March 13th.
okay,
13th.
that's good.
March,
So,
what,
and
what'd you say,
keep-
March 13th?
13th.
Yeah,
Keep
60
in
days from
mind
January 30th, okay.
that
That's good.
the
But you
town
have to
board
make the
needs
changes.
to receive those comments in order
Sort
to
of,
determine
right.
what changes are gonna be
Right.
made, so there has to be a little bit of a buffer.
Yeah,
in
there needs to be some time,
So the product has to be done by March 13th.
I
Your
guess-
The
product.
final document.
Right.
I guess speaking for myself, I don't think that we need like many cycles on this. I think if we could just have a chance to review it and come together one time in a working session or whatever it might be and coalesce, combine our comments and have a conversation about it, maybe that's all we would need.
I think so. I think that
Well, let me go
probably-
back to your board is next set to meet on the 18th.
Right,
Okay, so.
which is a problem. Not as bad a problem as
The question
before.
is,
I always
would you
found
want a work session, a special
Before?
work session, to specifically address this at a different date, time, what
beforehand.
have you, before that?
I would be willing to do that in the interest of time if it's convenient to everybody else. And-
Are we meeting, is that group meeting again?
No.
No.
Okay, so then yes,
No,
I
no.
agree with Tom, let's have a powwow sooner rather than later.
Okay.
Okay.
So pick a date.
Do you want to do next Tuesday, the 11th?
That's good for me.
Does that work?
That works for me.
It's okay. Let's see.
Okay, so it's tentatively?
Yeah, do you want to
Time?
do, do you want to do 7 o'clock? I mean, our regular time?
Well, the town board has, there's meetings here
Okay.
at 7.
So
I
we're,
don't know
there's
that
only
I
gonna be
necessarily
4
have
of
to be
us.
here
Yeah.
for the work
Well,
session.
you're gonna be.
Probably
you know,
not, right?
Going back and forth as always, right?
Yeah,
I
I
don't-
know, with the town board meeting, but,
You're in good hands.
you wanna meet it?
Why not the day
And
after
the town board's meeting, so if we have some sort of question, Ed or Nick will be next door,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
That's a good
Ed will be there that night.
Okay.
Can we find a spot here? Town board's meeting.
Yeah. Did you wanna do it at 6? Can I propose earlier than 7?
Well, that might be, can we find a spot here at 7, or are all the rooms taken for that night?
I do not know if all the rooms are taken. I know the assembly room is taken, because that is the continuation of the public scoping on February
You would
11th.
rather sit around a table anyway.
Right,
Oh,
no,
yeah.
but,
Oh, yeah.
no, here's the thing, absolutely, you need to have a work session, without a doubt. I believe that we can find you a room, it is the same evening as February 11th. If you would like my participation, I would request that it be at 6 instead of 7,
I see,
because
that's
I
fair.
need
Oh,
to
okay,
attend the
that's fair.
public scoping session.
fair.
That's reasonable.
Can you do
Logic?
6?
I could do 6.
We're using logic now? Okay, I'm good with that.
And
As
I
far as the
also
scope.
think it would help with the town board and giving them,
Yep.
you know, the fact
Yeah,
that you're
yeah, sure.
willing to work on that.
So you think 6 o'clock on next Tuesday? Is that
Works for
okay?
me.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, good.
So, Sabrina,
Yes.
I have some questions about how this gets done. I think that, unless I'm mistaken, this is sort of new territory for all of us. We've done EIS before, and we've done them for private development, we've done them for legislation, Chappaqua Crossing, as a involved agency. But the difference in those is that, and I think this is true for Chappaqua Crossing also, there was a specific development program. And I think in Chappaqua Crossing, there was actually, the PDCP was part of the early work in order to arrive at the revision to the comp plan, in order to allow the zoning legislation to come in place, and then have this PDCP that the zoning legislation was actually, unless I'm mistaken, pretty much tied to. Amount of retail development, all those things were pretty well known. And as a consequence, the process by which you decide what the impacts are, just the technical impacts, forgetting community character and all that stuff, which is a big issue, but just the sort of sewer and traffic and all that stuff, those were knowable quantities, right? Because there were so many square feet of retail, so many parking spaces, and in the end, so many residential units, and I don't know whether, I forget whether that was in it, I don't think it was, because it was a separate zoning category that was being put together for retail. I don't know, when we're talking about build and no build scenarios here, I don't see where we're going to, maybe you can walk me through how you arrive at what those numbers are.
Okay.
Because there are, one way to do it is a developer comes in and he tells you. Another way to do it is apply some standards to it, like so many units per acre, right? Another way to do it would be to actually do some test fits of all these properties and arrive at, this is how many actually can be built here.
Okay.
So what's the process,
So
how
I'm-
we
I'm-
arrive at that basic number? Because that
And
drives
and I
everything.
hear you, and I hear you 100%, which
So
is
how do we get
why the proposed action includes this. Okay? When it comes to this, there's still some information that needs to be collected when it comes to parking.
No, I'm sorry. No, I understand all that, but I want to know if you could help me with this. How do you get the numbers of residential development and commercial development that are going to drive the full build-out, partial build-out, no build-out? How do you arrive at those numbers? 'Cause
Well,
there's-
I will tell you, the code right now has a designated must-have first floor commercial area, right? So those properties that can be built out to the maximum height, and they're within the commercial zone where you must have commercial use, that first floor square footage will be calculated.
Okay, I get that, but there's a problem there, because the code also doesn't say there are no restrictions on retail development. There are only requirements and stipulations for certain sites, But anybody who doesn't have that stipulation can still do commercial development. And that commercial development not only affects the overall numbers with respect to, whether we're achieving the vitality of the hamlet and all that, which is part of the reason to be doing this. I mean, it's right here, right? That's one of the things we're going to try and measure. It also affects, well, if you're doing residential, you get 1.1 per unit. If you're doing retail, it's 2.8. Now you have a problem trying to understand what the parking is. And so how do you arrive at what really the full build-out scenario is? Do you decide that actually what's going to drive this in the end, to a large degree, is parking and utilities? Because that's where it's going to happen. Do you assume that you're only going to have commercial where the zoning says it has to be? Or do you assume that actually you're going to have commercial development on the whole ground floor everywhere? And then there'd be a reduction, a commensurate reduction in terms of residential. Is that how does this happen?
The assumptions of the build-out, and I'm not sure what they are yet. I can tell you that the consultant team has made certain assumptions, and we need to be informed of those assumptions. But those assumptions will assume commercial where it's identified to be commercial.
But that,
Well, it's mandated.
but
Mandated,
that
right.
doesn't get you to, okay, I'm sorry.
Hold on,
If it was restricted to those areas, then I think that would be a valid way to look at this.
And potentially it could be restricted to those areas.
But, okay.
Listen, I am learning as you are learning in the sense of how to implement this code, what it means. This
Right.
is not, and I need to say this is not a prescription for every single property to put a building up from lot to lot as tall as it can go, okay? That's not what a form-based code is.
No, but it's what it allows. That's
No,
the
it
point.
doesn't. It does not allow that,
It-
Tom.
It does not
It
allow
does
a
not
private
allow
developer,
that.
it does not allow a private developer to take the form-based code and say, I'm gonna assemble these properties, and I'm going to make the investment, and it might be a type 3 building, it might be a type 5 building, just to get it through the building code. I'm gonna make that investment, and I'm gonna put up a building, which is a 4-story building, and has, commercial on the ground floor. And those are the numbers, right, residential numbers, those are the numbers that drive my impact in the hamlet. Now, there's an aggregate to that, which I would assume is the responsibility of the EIS to identify and then measure.
Correct.
So how is that gonna happen?
Yeah, if I understand.
What's the process by that?
So if I understand your question, or maybe I'm asking a different question, if you've got 10 pieces of property, boom, 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 the form-based code lets each individual one develop a certain way, but if you put them all together, I think you get more with the 10, more development. So is that what's getting tested?
Yeah, how are they doing
If
this?
I
Do you
can
know?
add, I don't know that I can answer your question directly, but I can maybe address something on the back end. So like what the GEIS is intended to do at the conclusion of it. And that is to set thresholds by which development can occur that won't trigger the significant adverse
I
environment.
think we
So you're
understand
kind
that,
of
Jennifer.
but you're
We know
kind of
that.
determining through what you're reviewing and the alternatives that you're reviewing through this process, where that tipping point is. And by doing that, you're kind of,
We know-
backfilling what those
forgive me, but-
thresholds are gonna be, what the height's gonna be. That,
Okay, we know that. I just don't know what the starting point is for this. I don't know how it's gonna happen. I don't know how they're gonna sign this development in order to even begin to run the numbers. And, the subjective stuff, like, what's a Main Street gonna look like? I mean, all that stuff is part of this, and it's a really, really big and complicated thing.
It is complicated.
This is really complicated because there's so many unknowns and so many assumptions. And here's the big assumption. What are you doing about the town land? How do you decide right now the town land is occupied by commuter parking, by open space and recreation, and a public facility? We have in this proposal that is open for development. So any development that is loaded into this EIS in town-owned land is necessarily, in order to be a reasonable, logical alternative, it's gonna have to displace some of that. I don't know what it's gonna be.
Is that what
It
these
might-
numbers, that's what these densities are, aren't they? Aren't these the
I
densities?
don't wanna call attention to that, cause I have no response to where these come from and how this was done.
Because
But
I
that's-
thought those are the numbers that they got by filling up these
They
blocks,
I'm talking about-
they did, this is the build out.
right? That's the
I don't know
build-out.
if this is to me, it is not a final build out. I don't know what the assumptions have been made. It is too premature. I
Well, I
understand the
think-
question you're asking.
Yeah, okay, let me really keep asking it, okay? Because
Okay,
there-
cause
no,
I
honestly,
don't have an
because-
answer for you.
Well, we should, it seems to me, when we have a document here, and we've been going through this for how many weeks and months, that we're coming to maybe something which is a fundamental ask here, which is, if we are putting into the zoning code based on a EIS assertion of what is acceptable, right? And we haven't, for instance, if we say we're going to put, I don't know, 300 units on train station property, somewhere in that calculation, there has to be a notion of what land it goes on, doesn't it, Jennifer? Is it going to go on parking lot land? If it's going to go on parking lot land, that is absolutely an impact. And that parking lot would have to be built, which is absolutely a financial impact to the town. If it has to go on instead, because that's not acceptable, it has to go on the ball field, that is absolutely an impact. If it has to go on this property here, that is absolutely an impact. So the assumption that we're gonna just go ahead and take this diagram and assume it's all gonna be housing, you can go ahead and do that, but in the EIS, if that's all gonna be housing, it seems to me there needs to be an analysis of, okay, what happens to the parking? Do people move to Peekskill? What happens to this building, and what happens to the recreational land? I don't understand how we're gonna do this.
Well, I think that really gets to complexity for what we're supposed to do with the scoping document. These, I think, based on my experience with scoping before, these are exactly the kinds of things that I think that we can propose that should be looked at, all these different variants, because I agree with you.
This is a deal breaker.
Yeah, just doing black and white, build out, not build out, and partial, whatever. I think what we should be requesting is, there are different ways to get your maximum build out with this, under the code here, and the different impacts. So I think the key for us, and this is why I think it takes a lot of thinking and a little bit more time for us, is to really try to identify the things that we think really need to be looked at in the scope. And I don't know what the answers are, I have no idea what the answers are, and I'm not even quite sure I know what the questions are at this point, but these are the questions that Tom's raising are the ones that have got to be, I think, introduced into the scope.
I would agree and maybe go a little bit further, which is we know what needs to be looked at. We know parking needs to be looked at. We know if you're gonna displace a commuter parking lot, that has got to be looked at.
Well, I think,
And so-
yeah, I
I'm sorry,
agree, but I
just
think the
let me-
details, yep.
And to me, that's not a detail, to me, that's a fundamental
But
problem.
isn't that
I'm
done in the
sorry.
purchase and sale agreement? Hold on, wait, I think you're going off on a tangent that doesn't apply. If the town is just looking to set up zoning for a portion of the town, and then the town wants to go sell the train land to John, the developer, to do something, part of the purchase and sale agreement would be that he has to take care of the parking that's there.
But it's
right?
but you don't know that. And it's in the EIS anyway, it's in the EIS to identify that, I think, going forward. to
Well,
make
well,
sure
you
that's
think it
all-
have
is
to understand
identified.
that
How's
is
it
a fundamental.
How's it identified?
That was a determination by the town board before they even walked down the road of changing the zoning, that there's to be no net loss of existing parking. Okay, that's the
From the get-go.
foundation that the code has been established on.
Well, then, how do we have a code that shows this area zone for development? It's moving from a industrial whatever it is, which is fine for parking, and we're going to all the trouble to change it to a development zone. And it's not just the parking lots where nobody's really focused on right now, but they're rezoning that, but that area around the train station where there are parking lots. So I understand the declaration, but I made this point in the meeting the other day, which is it seemed to me like we jumping the gun on the public land because we have no way to make a commitment to development, and as a consequence, we have no way to assess. We have no way to assess, as far as I can tell, the environmental impacts.
Okay,
Sorry,
so.
I just had to finish what I was saying.
And I understand, and I will be more prepared to have the discussion next week when we sit down around a table and we workshop this. I need more answers myself regarding how the build-out is being constructed, based on what parameters and assumptions are being made. I can tell you, let me finish, I can tell you that the market analysis identified the breaking point for a private investment, okay, and how many stories that typically is. If the town feels they cannot stomach any loss of a parking space, off the cuff, that means if you need to go to 4 stories, if you're gonna displace parking, you need to go to 5 stories, because you need to reserve the existing parking that is there. Or you need to allow some development area to accommodate for the lost parking.
So I promise you I understand that. I mean, that's just basic. What I don't understand is how you do an environmental impact statement based on these eventual consequences. I mean, I think that part of the reason to have a development plan, a development program, is to really understand what the real consequences are. And to me, it seems as though, I don't want to say segmented application, because that's not what we're doing here, but that there is a giant level of public policy and with respect to putting zoning on land and the consequences of that zoning, which seem not to be analyzed in the EIS. And it seems to me that maybe there's a vehicle to do that. I don't know what it is, but.
Yeah, but, you know, under seeker, you can't segment projects, right?
No, you can't.
What?
No, you're right, you can't.
Okay, so.
You can
That's-
under limited circumstances, but
I didn't mean to say it was segmented,
Hey,
it
off
just
the right
feels like it.
people. I'm sorry I said that, no, I didn't mean that.
it's not illegal per se.
Oh, yes. But because of that, then it leads you theoretically to looking at the worst case under seeker.
There you go.
And I would offer that glancing through this is the worst scenario. And that then has to be looked at to evaluate all the issues like parking, all the ones that have been outlined here, and we could probably add another half a dozen
So-
easily. I got at least 2.
Right, so my question is,
What I'd like to do.
I would like to finish.
All right.
My question is, and I'm really not trying to be a disruptor here, I promise you. I promise you I'm trying to help out here. I know that I'm getting a little bit strident, but I'm frustrated because I see something coming here which maybe is not a problem, but I really see it. And, you know, I'm no longer a guy sitting in a meeting, now we're part of an involved agency. And what are we supposed to do under these circumstances? So if it's the worst case scenario, and the worst case scenario is as much residential as you can get in there that zoning allows, and as much retail as that zoning allows, and those are the big numbers, that's fine. Part of that analysis then needs to say, what do we do with the parking? What are the consequences to parking, right? What are the consequences of the ball field?
Absolutely.
What are the consequences? And I actually don't think that is I'm guessing that that's not a useful exercise, because that's not gonna happen. That's just a paper exercise. And I guess what I'm asking is because nobody's gonna get rid of all the parking. So I guess what I'm asking is there a policy statement coming from the board, or some sort of an amendment, or some sort of a way to get to the actual probable future use of public land that stays public, and use that as one of the brackets for how much residential goes on the public land. And that's the number we ought to be working with. Otherwise, I think we're going down this rabbit hole.
Right, and that, I couldn't agree with you more, because this is, in my opinion, the scope right now, and my recommendation for scope and broadening the scope would be to embrace public development as well. It's not looked at all. All we're looking at right now is residential and commercial. The public is not looked at. And realistically, if the public is looked at, it's going to have ramifications on all the things that Tom talked about, traffic, parking, et cetera. So I don't know where my notes to myself or toward the end where, Sabrina, you've got a number of areas where it's basically you say as related to other areas, et cetera. Maybe that's where it goes, and that's where we need your guidance. But it seems to me that the exercise as currently scoped is nowhere near broad enough. It is therefore flawed in that, and I've been saying this for a while now in the committee as well, it's too narrow and it's not embracing the public possibilities.
Well, the draft legislation isn't doing that either. The
Exactly.
fact-pounding document
Yes, exactly.
doesn't seem to do that.
Exactly.
What's the definition of public possibility?
Use of the public property other than for private residential purposes.
Public facility, whether it's whether it's a community center, whatever.
Here's the exercise I've been thinking to myself how to describe this. But imagine that there are no constraints, okay, which is idiotic. But
Gotcha.
let's say we decide as a matter of policy, we want to have what the public property is going to be is some combination of parking, obviously, but also an art center, all right? We've decided we're going to be Ridgefield South. We're going to do this. This is what we want. This is our theme. We want to instead build, I don't know, a hockey rink. Maybe we want to build a Chelsea Piers type thing with a private developer, and that's going to be on our public space. Just think of, if we do that, what the ramifications and impacts are to the hamlet if we do that, and then we also talk in terms of, well, we've already looked at the maximum build-out because we've got these residences and some commercial properties. That element of public vision, I think, needs to be at least, I don't know if you could address it in detail, but it's got to be at least recognized, and therefore, that really becomes the worst-case scenario in terms of traffic, infrastructure, parking. We haven't begun to scratch it.
Or at least that the ball field on this property is something that's not going to go away.
Well, the ball
Public
field's still
facility.
on that drawing. They kept the ball field up there.
That's not the drawing we're looking at, though. Go to the zoning drawing.
I'm assuming that's the Torty Dallas plan,
Go
so
to
I'm
the zoning.
assuming that's the plan that they're using.
The zoning drawing, I think, zones that for residential.
It's zoned
It's
right
zoned
now.
for, but the plan that they're gonna use, I think, to run numbers does not have anything on it. I think
well,
it's
that's
the
a-
other plan that you saw.
That's an assumption.
Yes, oh, without a doubt, that's an assumption I'm making, but
Right, and I think that
We need
through the outreach process, nobody wants to see rec field disappear. Unless that sentiment has changed, and I would
don't think
put a
it has,
wager
so
on
we-
that. I don't think so either.
So I'm concerned about process here, and which leads to outcomes, right? And you're right, that nobody's gonna want it, so why is it zoned that way? I mean, and I don't, it just doesn't make, nobody's gonna say, get rid of all the parking. Why is it zoned that way? Nobody's gonna say, let's move this, why is it zoned that way? Now, there might be some reasonable, smaller pieces of that. Well, we could do some parking, you know, maybe the ball field doesn't have to be a ball field, we want it to be a park. Those are all part of public policy decisions that I think need to be in place in order for us to really understand what the use of this land is going to be, so that we can come up with the brackets that need to form the basis for approving this under EIS. And I just want to say something, I didn't focus on this, actually, this particular thing, that just all of a sudden alarmed me until just the other day when I actually finally started to review this and focused away from the draft legislation itself. I would have raised this earlier, although in the very beginning I raised maybe we ought to be doing something different with the public land. But I'm being urgent about it now because we only have a week and a half, and I think it's a really big question.
Comments from
I have some other thoughts too, is that listening to my peers here, I see 5 things that are physical things that could stop the project at a certain point. That would be traffic, schools, water, wastewater, parking, and then roads. Streetscapes and a lot of other stuff that can wait. But I would say that we can say, gee, here's what we can get in the way of wastewater. We need if you do 1,000 families, then you're going to need 300,000 gallons a day of water.
Yeah.
Okay, that's nice. We might be able to get that. But what about the wastewater? Is there room for another 300,000?
Absolutely, you're 100% correct.
Right,
Okay.
Dick is.
Yes, he is.
And I remember in the very beginning of this process, there was discussion which got pushed aside, which is shouldn't we look at all of those numbers first. We know what the traffic.
So-
Can I please finish a statement, Sabrina?
I wanted to finish mine.
No, I thought you were done.
Oh, I was.
There was a conversation at the very beginning of this process where there was a suggestion made that we know what these numbers are. We know what the traffic numbers are. We've had traffic studies down here having to do with a number of things, and we know what those numbers are. I'm sure we have a handle on the sewer. I'm sure we have a handle on these hard numbers. And those would be the broad brackets for us then to come in and decide, okay, what is just generally the level of development that we can absorb here? And what do we want it to be, and where do we want to put it? And that's part of a master plan process that comes up with something more definitive than just broad brush zoning that then you can take with more specificity. It's like a PDCP, but that doesn't have to be that detailed, into this kind of a process and end up with a result which, it seems to me, would take less turmoil, and you'd be starting at a place where you're more likely to end up than some place where you're getting on a train, but you have no idea where it's going.
But it would still probably be a two-step process. So you say, here
Sure.
are the blocks that we have right now.
Sure.
So that we then have to weave words into whatever this is going to be that say, these are blockages in general. You can have a share of it that's proportional to the amount of space that you're going to take. And, if there's any goodies left. But we have to think about the rest of the community also. If they're going to get water supply, and are they going to be stuck in wells like, there are in the outer areas some places. Well water is not that safe these days, not around here. So there's a whole bunch of things that you might get stuck on. There might be 2 or 3 that you're really stuck on, and a developer has to know that. This is a sticking point for him to come in and say, well, my project will be net zero on all of these things. We're gonna train our residents to drink treated sewage and things like that. I'm being a little outrageous here, but so that it's a no net loss.
Right.
And that's another thing to feature in it, is where do we look and say that we're gonna look for things where you have to proceed on a no net loss.
So that's, I guess, part of the mitigation thing. I don't know.
A happy point. I would add natural light to the thing about view shed. Natural light has got a health impact of sorts.
Might have a power impact as well.
So-
With solar cells.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
solar
agree.
cells and a lot of other things, so that, that's another sort of semi-environmental health kind of.
I have, I'm sure we all will have some specifics also, like maybe we ought to be being a little bit more careful, a little bit more aggressive with respect to solar roof panels. I know we have something in our code about that, but maybe that could be advanced a little bit. But here's one thing that I don't quite understand with respect to parking, for example. We have new parking ratios that are proposed in the draft legislation, which are less parking, I think, than we now have in the existing code. Like now, I think it's 4 per thousand, and this recommends 2.8 for retail. We have 1.4 for residential, I think, and it's 1.1 here. Is this going to be measured based on, in terms of the parking impact, is this going to be measured based on the existing parking requirements, the new development based on the existing parking requirements, and then also on the new parking requirements so that we know what the quantitative difference is?
Yes.
Or will it just be applying the 2.8?
No, you have to demonstrate the existing versus the proposed and the impacts.
For the level of development we're proposing, you do both parking
Correct.
ratios? Okay.
And I believe that's why they're suggesting so much height in the buildings. Because if a developer were to come take all the town trained land, it's about $25 to $30 million just to park that parking in structured parking. To cover that nut, he's gonna have to build density, and then his density is also gonna have to be parked. So then the parking garage is gonna get even bigger.
Right.
That's why I was asking, is there like a realistic plan that we
My
could
point.
study?
That's my
Because I understand the thresholds and all that, and we could do all these threshold things, but we may be projecting something that never really will ever happen. So that's why I was wondering if if we, or if the consultant looks at their plan and goes, well, maybe block C, D, and F get developed, and everything else stays the same, does that get studied, or?
Yes,
That's what I'm just
there
asking.
is a realism here.
Okay.
And I can't tell you what that realism is because I don't understand that at this
Fair
moment.
enough, yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
so,
Don't
but yes,
understand
there
that?
has to be.
I'm sorry, you don't understand that?
The little chart in the map.
That's short.
The consultant, that was their preliminary build-out, and it is small and unreadable because I didn't want to bring a lot of attention
Right,
to it,
right.
because I don't know the assumptions that were made when they produced that.
Like that parking number, does that parking number say 2,000
I
or
can't
3,000
read it,
spots?
I can't
don't
read
know.
it, I
Wait, okay,
cannot
no,
read it.
hang on.
And so I hear your comments. Let me finish. I
go
hear
ahead.
your comments.
Go ahead.
I think that if you're willing to have a workshop to look at the scope and fill it in more, I will provide you prior to your workshop next week an amended scope based on what I've garnered since the public session, because I think it will help inform your discussion.
Great.
But the numbers.
And we'll carry on from there. I
Okay.
cannot change the approach that the town board has chosen to
course
take
not.
with this.
Yeah. No,
I
but-
apologize for that.
No, but I think we have the
No,
ability
you don't have
to,
Can I-
you know, add to the scope.
Absolutely.
And that's how we do that, I think.
So, let me just, mea culpa. This is the first time I've seen this. This particular diagram. I don't think that this is something that's been available to us,
No, it
unless
isn't.
it's been online.
They had a couple of those plans, but I don't know if that was the exact one.
They have not
they
substantively
didn't-
been reviewed
But-
or
right.
digested.
But they had a couple of these plans, but they didn't specify that this was the plan and these are the numbers that we're gonna attach
Agreed.
that I saw.
Agreed,
That's
yeah.
the point.
Yeah.
So this is the first time I've seen this, and it looks like it does, I'm assuming with town board, agreement, making some determinations about which part of the land is reserved for, park space, for this building, for parking, and the extent to which structured parking would be put into the mix in order to allow that amount of residential development. And that's the proposal. And that would be the one that we would be reviewing and doing the metrics on for the EIS. Is that right? You understand that?
Ostensibly, because the proposed action
Essentially, yeah.
includes a build-out analysis.
Right.
Well, I know that, but and they're proposing
And
this is
in
to
that
build out
build-out
on this
analysis,
land.
there are assumptions as to why properties are developed and how they are developed.
On this
It's
land.
not just the regulations that are in the code.
Right.
There's certain assumptions. I hope to, by your work session, be able to speak to those assumptions.
Right.
Well, then you
I
can do
cannot do that now.
Shouldn't they give you like a narrative so you can see it?
Yes, they should.
You can read it. See
Okay.
Will
This is a
will
good
we be
decision.
able to have that as well?
I am hopeful that you
Okay,
will. I
great.
cannot speak to that.
Well, this goes back to
So
the
the
administrative
reason-
question, though, I have, and that going back to even the February 14th, I still think we should send a note to the town board and request an extension beyond February 14th. Even if we meet next week, February 10th, for an hour and a half, whatever it is, until you have to go to,
I have to be at the town board meeting.
what time is that, 7?
7.
7. So we have an hour. It's really very limited time. Given the way we talk, that's a very short amount of time.
So
So
yeah, I agree.
I think we need more time. So can you
How
draft that?
much time, yeah, how much time, a week?
Maybe a week, yeah, because maybe we can even use the weekend to get drafts back and forth.
Because then you'll also have your meeting on the 18th.
Ah,
So.
so
you
maybe
could
the
be-
19th?
Do we know
have
what
a
our
work
agenda is on
session
the?
and then
Not yet.
talk about it in more detail.
Yeah.
On the
So,
18th as well.
I just have to, one more time,
Yep, 19th. Let's try
have a
that.
mea culpa here, because I had not seen this diagram, and this is the
I
first
haven't
time.
seen any of this
So
before tonight.
it called into question to me the strategy of, how this is gonna get done. And it looks to me as though it's been addressed, so I apologize for taking up everybody's time. But I think that the essentials are embedded in that diagram, and we can go from there. So I apologize. Now that I see it, it's.
That's good. Usually it's three
I
mea
couldn't see
culpas,
it.
but you had one mea culpa, and I
So,
apologize.
I just assume you.
Could you see it?
What did it for?
I couldn't see
Okay,
it.
was it even, okay.
Yeah, if you
That's the
could,
beginning.
Sabrina, no additional pressure, if you could get that plan from Eric with the densities that they thought per block, that would be outstanding.
I have been working to do just that, Greg. I do not see any value in obtaining that drawing and distributing it until I have the assumptions as to how it was created.
Right,
Okay, it does not do anyone any good.
Right.
And so I am, as your staff person, I have been trying diligently to obtain that for you all. Not just your board, but the town board and every other board in
So when did this come in? Is this just like the other day they sent it in as part of this? Was this attached to the presentation by Kimley Horn? That diagram?
Yeah, I've.
Is that how you had first arrived here, is through the EIS
Correct.
process
Correct,
outline?
correct.
It seems to me that that's a pretty substantive document for the town board to know about and the planning board.
Well, as are the assumptions.
Well, yeah, that's where it goes, right?
Narrative.
Yes, that is oh so important.
Now,
very critical.
Can you confirm or deny that for the parking to work, that everybody in town is gonna have to use a mini minor? Although I can tell maybe you wanna think about that for a while.
I plead the fifth.
Showing us how the sausage is made.
So we were assuming for now that we're gonna get this extension and we're gonna schedule a meeting for ourselves.
Well, we're scheduling a meeting for ourselves next Tuesday anyway.
Right, regardless, we're.
And hopefully, we'll get a note out and asking for the town board to extend the cutoff, say to 4 o'clock on February 19th, because we meet on the 18th. I mean, we still have to, if we make changes that meeting, we still have to have time just to make the typos.
You
And
wanna give yourself to the end of the week?
That makes
well, I would, but I don't, I'm on the asking side, I'm not on the giving side.
Try to get that.
Yes, but you also have staff who need to
Well,
put into
yeah.
writing what you need.
Yeah, so you want to do the 21st?
I think what is realistic, a
I'll defer
realistic.
to the person that's actually gonna be doing the work.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
Maybe I'm being.
See, that's a good
That's
assumption,
a-
that's a realistic assumption.
Yeah.
That is a realistic assumption, yes.
That's the next Friday.
The
21st.
21st. You're asking to extend the comment period to the 21st.
Yeah, that'd be a
From the
week.
from the 14th.
And that's for everybody, not just for us.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Right, you can't just do it for us.
Correct.
And so between now and next Tuesday, if we get the assumptions, fine, but you'll get us the marked up
I'll get you a
scoping.
marked up scope.
Based on what you've heard.
Based on what I have already incorporated from public comments and certain staff review.
Great,
Okay, very good, thank you.
You're welcome.
okay,
Are we done?
I think we're set, right?
Yeah?
Yeah,
feel set.
I exhausted myself, so.
Tom, would you
Okay.
like to take a nap and
I'm exhausted just listening.
initiate this meeting in a half hour?
Do we need to
That was my
close the
plan.
meeting?
Yes, we do.
Yes, you do.
Is there a motion to close the meeting?
Motion.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you.
Great.